Hi, everyone. Welcome back to In Session with Ashley B. It's me, your host, Ashley Buckner. I am excited to be here with you guys per usual. This is a podcast that's essentially ran by my audience. So I exist because you guys send in submissions and I get to respond to your submissions. And it's just this really great opportunity for you to get to know me both like on a more personal level as well as professionally as a therapist. Again, this podcast is not therapy. It is meant to be educational and reflective and an opportunity to kind of explore some of these concepts from a therapeutic lens. But again, it is not therapy. But thank you for writing in. I actually haven't recorded in a minute, and the time is ticking for this to drop for the first Sunday in July. And I pulled up my submissions and there was a whole bunch from you guys, and it just was like, okay, this podcast is landing with the people who need to see it and hear it and listen. And I just want to say thank you so much. It's such an honor to read what you guys send in, and I have quite a few I want to get through today and then have more for the next episode. But keep writing in. Obviously, you guys are sending all types of things in. It's really focused on like religious trauma in the LDS Church, and I obviously understand that that's kind of the niche I'm in here in Southern Utah, as well as just on social media. But I also want to say that nothing is off limits. You can literally write in anything you want to talk about, anything you want to explore, anything you want to dive into. I'm super passionate about nervous system work and brain spotting. If I will be honest, that's my expertise more than anything else. And it's kind of how I discovered religious trauma. So, what questions do you have about the nervous system? What are you kind of running into in maybe some of your own trauma work? And maybe that's all related to the church. Again, nothing is off limits here, and I love chatting about everything. So we're going to jump right in, get through all these submissions. I'm kind of recording this podcast because I had a client cancellation today. And so you guys are basically getting a therapy session time for this podcast, and I love that. Let's jump right in. I actually got a great question kind of about therapy that I wanted to start with, kind of more of a logistical question, but also I think could be really resonant for a lot of listeners. I'd love your perspective on the challenges ex-Mormons face when trying to find a therapist in Utah, or anywhere really, who isn't a current member of the LDS Church. It feels nearly impossible, like searching for a needle in a haystack. I understand that therapists are trained to recognize and manage their own biases, but I still struggle to trust that a therapist who is an active member can create a completely safe space for me to process my trauma, anger, and experiences related to the church. Part of me worries that consciously or unconsciously, they might become defensive, minimize my experiences, or steer the conversation in ways that protect the institution rather than support my healing. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Is this a common concern among people who are deconstructing their faith? And how do you navigate finding a therapist who feels like a good fit? Thank you so much for the submission. It is genuinely something that I get asked all the time. I talk about quite a bit with a lot of my clients or people seeking services. And I think it's a very unique challenge. I think Mormonism is a very unique culture. And so it's so helpful to find a clinician that understands the culture, first of all. And that's hard to come by unless they are a member or former member of the church. With that being said, this has kind of always been my stance since the beginning, since I became a therapist, right? And the training I received, as well as to eventually opening a therapy practice in Utah. A solid therapist who is there to support you and to not get in the way of your process. It does not matter what their religious beliefs are. Like, genuinely, it does not matter. And I know that's like hard to kind of sit with because like you have a LDS therapist who is an active member of the church. I think it is difficult to reconcile. Like, how are they showing up and holding space for me while believing in this system that in a lot of ways does cause harm and impact mental health? Like, that is a very difficult thing to kind of hold. And I recognize that. I think when you are trained to be a therapist and you dive into it and you're an ethical therapist and you're working on your own biases, you are constantly doing the inner work to be able to hold space for someone who is completely different than you. And I will say for myself, that's something I feel really proud that I'm able to do. Like, I can hold space for clients with different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, like all types of situations and scenarios that I now would not necessarily agree with, but that's not my job. My job is not to agree with them. My job is to hold space for whatever's coming up. Like, I feel very equipped to hold space for members of the church, which people will be like, no way you can do that with your social media. it might make members of the church uncomfortable. And that would be a conversation that I would have with them, or that they would share. Like, I don't feel comfortable seeing you because of the way you talk about the church. And I would say, thank you so much for sharing. Tell me more about that. I would then provide them with referrals and resources to see someone else. I think that we get this idea that the therapist has to be like such a great fit for us, and which I think that's true. You need to find a therapist that you feel comfortable talking to and being open with. But it's also this really awesome opportunity to kind of have that relational conversation, and even saying, hey, I think you're a good fit and you have all of these things I'm looking for, but you're also a member of the church and I am no longer a member of the church. And how are you going to support me through that? How the therapist responds to that will tell you everything you need to know about whether the therapist is the right fit for you. And so I think that's just one tool in kind of searching for the right therapist, is to have honest conversations with them. I love when my clients tell me something that I did that they didn't like, or they have feedback for me, or something made them uncomfortable, or they're unsure or uncertain. And it's regarding our relationship, because it's this great opportunity to build a relationship, to practice like that conflict resolution skills, the communication skills, to demonstrate how I navigate that as a clinician, and how I really do take my own biases and my own ego out of it. In the same breath, I know not every therapist is going to do that. Not every therapist is perfect. Not every therapist is ethical, and they're going to misstep and make mistakes. Again, how do they show up consistently? Can they repair if they do mess up, right? These are all the qualities you want to look at. And in some ways, I think that those kind of conversations and that dialogue can be really therapeutic and really beneficial. And also, right, like, know what the red flags are. If you do have a clinician that is an LDS therapist and they're suggesting that part of your treatment is going back to church, or they're telling you to read your scriptures, or they're crossing the line in any way, like, those are some red flags. I actually have a client that I've been working with for a long time. They were seeking out couples therapy, and the couples therapist with LDS. And I said to them, I was like, in the same way that it would be inappropriate for me to tell you to stop going to church or to question your beliefs, that same line exists on the other end. And turns out this LDS therapist has been a great fit for this client and their partner. And I'm really glad that they didn't let, because they were LDS, be the reason to not see them. And so that's what I also would invite people like listening to do too, because LDS therapists are going to have so much knowledge of Mormonism. You're not going to have to explain the culture to them. I think the thing that you need to tease out is, do those therapists have the ability to hold space for you? And again, like I said, how they respond to that will tell you everything that you need to know. And also too, if you're ever uncomfortable, if you ever feel like they're crossing a line, you can address that with them, or you can change therapists. You don't have to go back. I also want to let everyone know that I have created over the last couple of years an extensive resource list for LDS therapists, and ex-Mormon therapists, more specifically, people who are well-versed in Mormon culture, who have left the church, who are safe spaces for people who are questioning their faith. So you can send me an email and I will send you a resource list. The best way to get a hold of me is through my website. I have a submission form. You can just say resource list and I will send that to you. It's a really great resource list. I have therapists in California, Arizona, Utah, obviously, Texas. I have an Idaho, and then I also have a nationwide provider too that offers support throughout the states. So I just think that that could be a really great opportunity. And also too, yes, LDS and Mormon culture is very niche, and also high control religion is high control religion. And so I think there's a lot of really great religious trauma therapists out there that might not know Mormonism like the back of their hand, but they understand high control religion and they offer really great support. I'm trying to make sure that I covered everything in that question. I think my biggest thing that I want to tell anyone when you're searching for any therapist, whether that's like to help you deconstruct your faith or just a therapist in general to support you, is to ask for a free consultation call. So I offer that to every single one of my clients that I end up working with, is that we do a 15-minute call for free, obviously, where they ask me questions. I ask them questions to make sure that we're a good fit. I would request that. If a therapist is not going to give you that, maybe they're not the right fit. And in that 15 minutes, ask them some of those questions that we talked about on here. Ask them how they navigate their biases, how they hold space for clients that aren't the same religion as them. Like, ask them those hard questions, because how a therapist responds to you in that moment is going to give you a lot of information. It's easy to get discouraged because maybe someone is not the right fit for you. and it's hard to find the right therapist. I also think we have to be kind of conscientious of how our own walls might be up, because it's really scary to start a therapeutic relationship. And so it's going to feel uncomfortable, and uncomfortable does not mean wrong. Sometimes uncomfortable just means we're doing something new. So kind of holding yourself accountable in that way as well, and being curious and open on this process. But again, like, ask them a ton of questions. If you start working with them and you get uncomfortable, be honest about that. There's also a lot of really great therapists out there that are not LDS that have the ability to hold space for you. And I think even asking someone who maybe isn't LDS to do a little bit more research, that's okay too. I think there's like so many great options out there. And I also want to validate, because when I opened my therapy practice in Utah, this was like well before my social media went viral. I had people actively seeking me out because they knew that I was not a member of the church, but I used to be a member of the church. And then I had people who were seeking me out that were not Mormon at all, and they didn't want a Mormon therapist. Like, I think Mormonism and being Mormon is very taboo in Utah, like, unfortunately, or all over the country, right? And so people don't necessarily want to work with a Mormon therapist, and so they'll seek out someone who isn't. And I guess I just come back to my training as a clinician and my ethics. And I know I can't speak for every therapist, right? But if you are a solid therapist and you are there to show up for your clients, you have the skill set to take your biases and leave them out the door. And maybe that sounds weird coming from me as someone who talks about the Mormon church in the way I do, but I feel very competent in that. And what you see on social media is not what you see in my therapy office. And I think that's a big missing piece just about therapy in general, and therapists presenting on social media in general. Is like, we're there to talk about things, but how we show up for clients one-on-one is going to be different, because it has to be different, because each client is their own person and their own individual. And so how we navigate that is kind of going to be a unique experience. And you will know if a therapist has good boundaries or not based on how they respond to some of those questions. I did not mean to talk for like over 10 minutes about this, but I hope it was helpful. It's something I'm actually really passionate about. I think one of the things I like to do, aside from like doing my own therapy sessions with clients, is helping people find the right therapist, because it is such a difficult experience and it can be really hard to find someone who's a good fit. So please send me all the more questions on that. This was a really great submission. Thank you for writing it. One more kind of like logistical thing, a therapy thing, or just like a little note to me that I wanted to say hi. Says, hi, Ashley, follow up from one that attended. Yes, repeat, dramatic effect. Attended the high control religious group. So side note, guys, about a year ago, I did my first like virtual group. Like, it was kind of like a coaching group with a bunch of people, and it went really well. So I'm excited that this person wrote in. It was definitely scary to attend, but it was really helpful to be with people in similar situations. I was definitely able to reflect with my therapist after the group about how I showed up and what that contributed to the group. I realized that I use a lot of humor to cope. Social media definitely fuels that, but it's amazing how videos from someone else who went through similar experiences can make you feel so seen and validated. I am by no means healed after leaving Mormonism and might not ever be, but steps have been taken in the right direction. Thank you so much for sending this in. I love to hear how people I've come in contact with are doing and where they're at. I also selfishly wanted to share this too, because I'm actually, drum roll, working on an online course that I am going to offer as a group first before I drop it as an online course to the whole world. So you guys this is the first time I've talked about it. Even really, I might have announced it, but I don't think I have. So hopefully going to get the marketing materials put together for that and release it in the next kind of hopefully month, so that people can sign up and we can get started. But I'm going to do it in the fall evenings. It's going to be a course about finding meaning and regulating your nervous system after religion. So I think it's going to be a great thing and a great resource for a lot of people, and hopefully become really accessible once it's an online course that lives on my website. But I will be offering it as a group first to people, probably 10 to 12 people. So anyways, thank you for writing the submission in so I could selfishly talk about the group. I appreciate it. But I really wanted to go back to what you said, where you said, I realize that I use a lot of humor to cope. I honestly think there's a part of that that's completely okay. I think we get to a part of our healing journey where sometimes the best thing we can do is to like really laugh about a very shitty situation. And I'm not saying that that's always appropriate, and I think there's a time and place for it, but I think to get to a place where you can laugh, where something that a video can just resonate so deeply and it makes you laugh, there's a healing element to that. And then obviously in the same breath, there can be times where it becomes avoidant, but from what I'm reading, it sounds to me like you have a lot of insight about that. And that is your superpower. Being self-aware is a superpower, and it'll allow you to kind of continue to make choices and decisions along this like deconstruction, reconstruction journey that are supportive. And I'm really proud of you. I think it is so incredibly scary to attend a group like that and show up with a bunch of people and be your authentic self. And it's also just like, I love that you talk to your own therapist about it, because it's this great opportunity to kind of work through some of that wouldn't have maybe been activated or shown up had you not joined a group setting like that. And I think that's what's really powerful about group work and interacting with a bunch of different people with a bunch of different personalities. It kind of shows us like, oh, how do we show up in these spaces? What protectors come up? What mask do we put on? What mask do we need to take off? Right? All of those layers. So thank you so much for sharing and for listening to this podcast and writing in. It means the world. I can't say that enough, you guys. Like, I genuinely can't believe so many of you are listening to me talk about all of these things for like 45 minutes. I would love to drop more than once a month. I'm not quite there yet. I'm actually hoping to start recording from my house. I have a home office that I am working on. It's almost put together. So hopefully next episode will be from my house. And then once I kind of have that down, maybe I can drop at least 2 times a month. I don't know. Not going to like hold myself to that, but I would like to show up here more for you guys, especially with all the submissions that keep getting sent in. So we're going to get back to submissions, a few more before we wrap up today. I kind of pulled these next two because June it's like Pride Month, right? And celebrating sexuality and all different types of sexualities. And these were a couple that I wanted to, really honor for this Pride Month, which is something really near and dear to my heart. If I'm being honest, the reason I left the Mormon church in 2008, the reason I stopped attending was because of the church's involvement in California with Prop 8. And when it didn't pass, the ward I was in at the time wanted to have a celebration, or they invited me to a celebration. And I really saw that celebration as a celebration of other people's pain and not really respecting like what this meant for so many individuals who wanted to get married. And I never went back to church after that. So the girl in my class with 2 dads when I was a sophomore in college, she's the reason I stepped away. And it's really cool to like still feel that all these years later, and also really reflect that in 18 years, nothing's changed when it comes to the LGBTQ plus population in the LDS Church. They're still marginalized. They're still seen as less valuable. And people want to push back on that. And like, read the family proclamation. Unless your parents are a mom and a dad, you're considered less than, right? And so anyways, I just like really want to give a shout out to that as we continue to dive in today. I, a 30-year-old female, recently got divorced, and my very traditional LDS parents have been kind enough to let me stay with them until my new apartment is ready. I have decided to leave the church. I've been inactive for 2+ years, and they are aware, but they continually try to push me to go to church. Once I move out, I plan on having a conversation with them to set a boundary about not asking or talking to me about church. I also want to let them know that part of the reason I no longer want to be part of the church is because I'm bisexual. I've always felt immense shame over this, and very few people know. Well, thank you for sharing with us here. Knowing how my parents are, the conversation will most likely not go well. I love them and want to respect their beliefs and hope for the same in return. What advice would you give to help me make boundaries clear to my parents? They continually tear me down about decisions I've made in my life, how much I weigh, my parenting style, etc. And I'm terrified to have this conversation with them. Oh my gosh. I've been thinking a lot about boundaries, if I'm being honest with you, and setting boundaries with people who don't actually have the capacity to honor or respect those boundaries. I mean, just given what you shared about your parents, I don't necessarily think they will show up for you in the way that you deserve to be shown up for, or nor do I think they will respect you in the way you deserve to be respected with your boundaries. And so I guess that's my first question is, what are you hoping to accomplish by setting these boundaries? Maybe there's a piece of that where you just actually need to set it, to say it out loud. So you've clearly communicated and it's purely just for you. And I think that's fair and that's valid. I think that if you're setting them in the hopes that something's going to shift or they're going to be different with you, I think that's a long shot. And in the same breath, I think it's also like, I do believe that boundaries teach people how to have a relationship with us. I think that is something that they do, and that's the purpose of having them. And I think sometimes we don't always have to like directly communicate them. Like, I think sometimes a boundary can just be within ourselves, that we know that we are not going to talk about church at all when we're with family members, right? We're not going to engage in certain conversations about it. We're going to just exit the room. Like, all of those are boundaries. And I also think there's a time and place to communicate where we're at, and how people respond to those boundaries tells us a lot of what we need to know and whether we need to continue to exist in that relationship or not. I actually have, I'm seeing it. I think I actually loaned it out. I'm looking on my bookshelf in my office. I think I loaned it out to one of my clients, but I do recommend the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. It is such an easy read in the sense that the letters are really big on the book, or you can listen to an audiobook. I have it on audiobook as well. She literally is going to teach you how to set boundaries, and she's not even a clinician. She's just like the boundary lady. She's the queen. I recommend anyone who's wanting to set boundaries to read this book. She's going to give you like an example of a green, like a really soft boundary, a yellow, a little more firm, and then a red. And she like really maps out how to do it. So read that. It's a great resource. I think just some notes from that. And what I would say is, when we're setting a boundary, we don't want to over explain, because the more we explain, the more likely people are going to push back and not receive like what we said. I think in this example, your parents keep inviting you to go to church. I think the green boundary is, I am not going to, like, I'm no longer attending church. I don't want to go to church. Please stop inviting me. The next one is, I've made it clear that I don't want to go to church. If you continue to invite me, I'm just going to disengage from the conversation, right? The red one a lot of times is like a more like firm boundary, like where you literally leave. I think that one's kind of hard because you're living at your parents' house right now. So you kind of have to figure out how to negotiate that relationship. And that's like, in my opinion, sometimes like maybe we don't always need to verbalize our boundaries. We just need to have some boundaries with ourselves and figure out what we need to be okay and to be supported. Another thing that I think is really helpful when it comes to boundaries and understanding other people's behavior, which I actually learned from Dr. Becky, who is a parenting person I highly recommend. It's called the most generous interpretation. So if we look at your parents asking you to go to church and kind of pressuring you about going to church and not respecting your sexuality, because it sounds like they're not going to respect that you're bisexual, what's our most generous interpretation of that? And I'm not saying this to like minimize the harm that any of their responses say, but my most generous interpretation of your parents' behavior is they are scared that they are part of this belief system that has told them this is how people need to be. And God, it's fucked up, right? And that creates so much fear that it will impact the relationship they have with their daughter. And that's really sad. And why I think this is helpful is it allows you to have a little bit of compassion while also deciding what you need and what you deserve in relationships, because compassion without boundaries is not compassion. So I think like if I know that my parents have so much fear and are so scared and so indoctrinated that they can't hold space for my sexuality, that tells me that they're not safe people to have this conversation with. And I think that's really important information. If I know my parents are not going to be able to hold space for my bisexuality, like if I'm you, why do I want to talk to them about it? And that's where I'd invite you to get really curious. Like, what is the purpose of telling them you don't want to go to church and it's because you're bisexual? Like, what's the purpose of telling them? What do you want to accomplish? Is it worth it? I know that your parents, and I know you want them to love you and to see you and understand you. And I want that for you too. And I also like, do they have the capacity to do that based on this like most generous interpretation of their behavior, how fearful they are, how indoctrinated they are? Can they actually really show up for you and your sexuality in the way you deserve? And I'm not saying it's okay that they can. Like, I honestly think it's heartbreaking, and it's something that so many people are navigating in this space. And there's a ton of grief, but I also work with so many people that are expending so much energy setting boundaries with these people who don't have the capacity to show up for them. who don't understand them, who don't want to understand them because of their own shit. And that's not fair. And you deserve better. And so is there a way for you to, exist in this relationship that feels aligned? And maybe there isn't. But I think when we're thinking about setting boundaries and being open and vulnerable to someone, really reflecting on whether they have the capacity to hold space for us and whether they're worthy of hearing us and hearing like about this really vulnerable, sacred part of us. And are there people in your life that you can open up to and share with and honor like your sexuality? And can we lean more into them instead of these individuals who clearly don't have the capacity to show up for this? And I'm not saying that this needs to be a permanent thing, that you never ever have this conversation, but I think what matters more than anything is how you feel about yourself. You're telling me that you have not shared with hardly anyone, right, that you're bisexual. So that's still something you are working through. There's maybe still some shame there. And I would invite you to start there and kind of develop more of a relationship with yourself and your sexuality before you start opening it to people who are not going to be open to it, right? Like when we are in a solid place with who we are and we feel really grounded in that identity, it's not going to hurt as much. It's not going to leave as big of a mark by people who can't hold space for us. So those are just some of my thoughts. Obviously, these are just like my thoughts based on these like little blurbs that you guys send in. And some of it's like a clinical lens, some of it's like personal experience lens. So I try to always say like, take it with a grain of salt, take what resonates, leave anything else off to the side. This is your space just as much as it is for me to be holding these conversations with you. Thank you for that submission. And thank you for sharing your sexuality with us. It's beautiful. I'm still deconstructing the church, but I've left and don't want to go back. I'm a lesbian and I don't want something that cannot fully hold my authenticity. My mother only knows about the church part of it and is constantly trying to get me to come back, even though I've asked her to stop pushing because it makes me want to pull away more. We don't have the best relationship in the first place. I don't feel like she actually knows me anymore. And it feels impossible to want to or be able to tell her anything new when she's telling me instead of my choice to leave the church is sane instead of being agency. And she just keeps telling me how hard this is for her. Gosh, so par for the course. Instead of trying to understand this also is hard for me. I feel like I'm supposed to be responsible for her feelings, but I don't want to just come out to her when it doesn't feel like she knows me or can actually hold space for me. Good boundary. That's what I was just talking about. I also don't know that it feels safe to come out with the current state of everything else either. But this is what's on my mind all the time right now, that and everything else happening in the world, country. So valid. I didn't even actually realize, I knew I was going to read this submission just because like of like your sexuality and where you were at, but I didn't realize how much it would play into that last submission. So thank you, because I think you are naming exactly what I'm speaking to, that it does not feel safe to come out to someone. Like she's literally saying that you're being led astray because of Satan. So that tells me right now, she doesn't have a lot of capacity to honor your sexuality because she is, again, fearful, indoctrinated, whatever we want to say the like most generous interpretation of her behavior is, right? And also, I think we kind of live in a very interesting time in the world with like this Christian nationalism movement and like the just yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say there. I don't want to like go too deep into it, but like just like not honoring other people's sexuality, which to me, in my opinion, is the root of so much shit and distress and trauma in our world, is this like control that has been exerted over people's sexuality instead of just letting people figure out their sexuality and be sexual beings and explore that in a curious way. And so I'm really sorry that you're feeling that and you're having to navigate that, not only like on a very like large macro scale in the world we live in, but also within your own family system. I think that's incredibly difficult and lonely and isolating. But I also really want to point out, like, trust your instincts. You have some solid instincts. You are very well aware that your mom doesn't have the capacity to show up for you in the way that you deserve. And I think it's so important to lean into that and to honor that and to like celebrate that in you, that you are self-aware enough to know, which honestly probably led to your agency to make the decision to leave the church or to deconstruct or to question it or to step away, right? Like you are trusting your authenticity, you're trusting your instincts, you're leaning into yourself. And in my opinion, that is your greatest resource to navigate these things. It kind of goes back to the conversation that I was having with that previous submission in terms of boundaries with your mom and do you need to vocalize it? Have you vocalized it yet? I would recommend the same resources in reading the Book of Boundaries. But I also think too, I don't know if you're living with your mom. I didn't get that impression. So I think this is actually a really good opportunity where you can be more firm with your boundaries. So I would just say, like, Mom, I'm currently taking a break from church. I'm not interested in going. Please stop asking me to go. That's your green boundary, like pretty soft, but pretty direct, right? She continues to ask you, Mom, I've made it clear. I do not want to attend church. I'm not going to be going to church. If you continue to ask me, I am going to take a step back from this relationship. I'm going to hang up the phone. I'm going to leave the situation, whatever it is. Red boundary. She asks you again. You have to take that action of hanging up the phone, leaving the situation, whatever it is, right? Because you want to make it clear that if that boundary is not respected, that you follow through. And it's so important that you're consistent, because if you're not consistent with that, she's going to like be allowed to continue to get away with it. So I think in this circumstance where you're not living with her, if you are living with her, disregard what I said, because I think that makes it a little bit tricky because you can't just leave the situation. But if you aren't living with her, you have the ability to set that boundary. And maybe it means like you don't call her then. Like you stop calling her, you stop answering her phone calls. And she's like, why aren't you answering my phone calls? Well, because every time I talk to you, Mom, you ask me to go to church and I've made it clear I'm not going to church right now. And again, this is about teaching people how to have a relationship with you and how they respond to your boundaries. Tells you everything you need to know. Her disappointment, her fear, her whatever her concerns are, they are not your responsibility. And if they feel like your responsibility, that's yours to work through. That's what you need to be targeting in your own inner work. Like, why do you feel responsible for your mom's thoughts, emotions, behaviors? And I say this because, like, I'm going to tell you right now, that's something that I have done a lot of work on. And I don't know like your birth order, but I am an oldest daughter. And I think for my whole life, I took responsibility for my mom's emotions. And it really impacted my ability to have a relationship with her. I think I have a lot of resentment that I've had to work through. And like, my mom wasn't asking me to take responsibility for her emotions, but that was just kind of the nature of what happened. And I think like in a lot of ways, sometimes that was projected onto me when you have emotionally immature parents, or you have parents who, like have a lot of trauma and they haven't done their work and they're, like all of that stuff, like it can show up in a lot of these ways. And so I think one of the things I've really had to learn is like, if my mom's sad or my mom's upset, that's my mom's. Like she is the one who has to figure that out. And I'm not responsible for it. I think obviously like if I'm like being mean to her and calling her a bitch or what, all of those like horrible things, then yes, then that's like a different conversation. But if I'm just saying no, or if I'm just saying I don't want to go to church or whatever, right? And she's upset about that, that's hers to work through. My mom is not a member of the church, so I don't, she doesn't get upset about me not going to church, but I'm just like offering it as an example of like, if you are communicating kind, respectfully, honestly, and that person isn't happy with what you're saying, or they're upset at you, that's theirs to work through. And I think we need to put that back on them. And that's going to feel uncomfortable if you have always taken responsibility for her emotions. Like maybe some of your activation is like, it's uncomfortable to have your mom be upset at you. Yeah. Like that sucks. It's not fun to have your mom be upset at you, but also like, I think when you're working on your own identity and your own authenticity and your own differentiation, there's going to be times where she's not going to get it. And also you don't need her to get it in order to be okay. And maybe part of your ability to lean into your authenticity and your sexuality and where you're at with the church is to kind of take these steps of separation from your parents and your mom, and not let her have such a hand in how you feel and how you show up in the world. And I'm going to be honest, she might not ever get it. She might always blame Satan for you questioning the church, and that'll suck, but that's her reality, not yours. Because if you know that you have agency, it doesn't matter what she thinks. And obviously this is easier said than done because it's your mom and she gave birth to you and she's your primary caregiver, and we want her, like you want her approval more than anything, and you want her love more than anything. And I get that on such a deep level. And I think like sometimes in order to live the life we want, we are going to disappoint the people we love. And that's really hard. And it's also so worth it because you're carving out your own identity, your own family, your own authenticity, right? Like all of those pieces that make you who you are. Thank you for writing in. Thank you for this like great submission and conversation. And I didn't anticipate these are all going to flow so well together, but they really did today. And I love that. I actually had one more plan, but I'm at time because I have a session happening in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for showing up here and sending in all of your questions, all of your submissions. I love reading them. And even if I don't get to them on the podcast, know that they are seen and held and honored, and just like they're just incredible to read. So I am doing my best to literally bring all of them to the surface. Obviously, someone sent me like 3 pages worth of a submission, and I don't have the capacity to read that to this audience, but know that I did read it and I honor it. So like a couple paragraphs, obviously I'm always capable of reading, but like several pages, they're probably not going to be read on here. And that's just like the nature of the platform. Nothing personal, but I love reading what you guys are writing, what you're sending in, and what you're sitting with. And there's just so much curiosity here, and there's so much reflection. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's where we start to see the most shifts in our life, when we can be really curious, open human beings, and not scared to get uncomfortable. I think, like, if I could maybe think about a theme for today, and just like all the areas we talked about, uncomfortable does not mean wrong. Like getting out of your comfort zone, setting a boundary, right? That's going to feel uncomfortable. Starting with a new therapist is going to feel uncomfortable. Being in a group is uncomfortable, right? Like all of that's going to feel different, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. And I think there's a lot of truth to say that like change happens outside of our comfort zone. So just being curious about that and being willing to do things different and try new things, and also to like trust yourself. That might also feel really uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but you guys have great instincts just based on what you're writing in and what you're sending. So I look forward to diving in next month. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, whatever day you're listening to this, and take what resonates, leave everything else behind. I also think I might have repeated myself 100 times. I think last podcast episode, I might have talked about like being uncomfortable doesn't always mean things are wrong, but you know what? That's just how I work. So thanks for listening. Keeping it real here always. Happy Sunday. If you're listening on Sunday, I will see you next time.